Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, we've been examining the Māgandiya Sutta. This is discourse number 75 of the Majjhima Nikaya. And I want to review, before we go further, I want to review what we've covered so far. In this sutta, the Buddha is engaged in a conversation with a wanderer by the name of Māgandiya, who from his statements seems to be what we would call a hedonist, one who believes that the highest good is the enjoyment, the uninhibited enjoyment of sensual pleasures. And for this reason, he criticizes the Buddha by calling him what seems to be a derogatory name, calling him Bunahu, which the commentary explains to mean destroyer of growth. And the reason why Māgandiya criticizes the Buddha on this ground is because the Buddha teaches the restraint of the senses and the removal of craving and lust, whereas Māgandiya seems to believe that the way to true happiness, the ultimate happiness, is by giving free rein to the six senses and by allowing each sense to enjoy the most intense pleasures available through that sense in the greatest variety. Then the Buddha engages Māgandiya in a kind of debate and develops certain arguments against the hedonist position. First, he points out that one who abandons sensual craving experiences inward peace. This argument is developed in paragraph 9. And then he amplifies upon this by explaining his own personal experience, how in his earlier days, when he was a prince living in the palace, he was able to enjoy all the sense pleasures he wanted. And yet now that he has renounced the world and was living a very stark, spare, ascetic life, he experiences what he says is a delight even that surpasses even divine bliss. And so from this perspective, when he looks down upon sensual pleasures, he sees that they really give very little enjoyment, that they're really unworthy and deeply, in a very deep sense, unsatisfying. And he says, now that I have become a renunciant, I enjoy this delight apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states. And this should be understood to be what is called the fruition attainment of arhatship. That is the state of mind in which all defilements have been eradicated. And then the Buddha supports this with a simile of or an analogy of a wealthy householder who might have been enjoying sense pleasures while living in the household. Then he dies, but he also does meritorious deeds. And so when he dies, he's reborn in a heavenly world where he can enjoy celestial sensual pleasures. Then if he should look down at human beings enjoying human sensual pleasures, he would think that they are very poor compared to the celestial heavenly pleasures, the celestial sensual pleasures. And if somebody says, why don't you become a human being again and enjoy all of these delightful human sensual pleasures, he would say, no thanks, I'm satisfied with what I have up here. But for the Buddha, even divine sensual pleasures are worthless and meaningless, since he knows a kind of pleasure, a delight, which is beyond, far beyond, even the pleasures of the heavenly world. Then to hammer home in this argument against Māgandiya, to hammer home the deficiency, the defectiveness, the paucity of sensual pleasures, the Buddha uses a very striking and even one of the most powerful of his similes. This is the simile of a leper who is able to gain some enjoyment. He has these sores on his arms, legs, and body. And the wounds are opening and they're being crawling with worms. If anybody has sensitive stomach, this is not the sutta that I would recommend you begin your Dhamma studies with. Okay, so he has open sores, wounds. The flies are laying their eggs in the wounds, and the eggs are opening. Worms are crawling out and eating the flesh. And the leper, he's scratching the wounds and thinking, oh, how pleasant, how enjoyable. Okay, so this is the pleasure that he's getting. Then his friends and relatives bring a physician. The physician prepares medicine, cures the man of his leprosy. So he's not able to get that pleasure anymore. He doesn't have the wounds and sores anymore. No more worms crawling in the wounds. So he has no pleasure from scratching the wounds. But if you ask him, would you like to become a leper again? If you want, we can just get you infected. Then you'll have a fresh set of wounds and you can scratch them and enjoy yourself. He'll say, no dice, get that away from me. I never want to be a leper again. That's because he knows now he's free from this terrible itching. And so he doesn't get the pleasure from scratching, but he's quite satisfied in his normal condition without this terrible disease. And so the point of the argument is that those who get pleasure from indulging in sensual pleasures, that is like the leper scratching his wounds and getting pleasure from scratching. Yeah, and when the leper is trying to relieve himself from the pain of these wounds, one of his remedies is to heat up his body against a burning charcoal pit. And so now the Buddha points out that when the physician cures the leper from this leprosy, then later, 2 strong men might grab him by both arms and drag him towards a burning charcoal pit. What would he do, the Buddha says? Would he be happy to go towards the charcoal pit? But Māgandiya says no. He would try to avoid it, and he would even squirm and struggle to get free from those men. And what is the reason for this? Because the fire is, if you look at it objectively, the way it really is, it's really hot, scorching, and painful to the touch. And in fact, all the time it's been hot, scorching, and painful to touch. But because the leper had some, we call, impairment of his faculties, because his faculties were impaired, he had a mistaken or distorted perception of the fire as being pleasant. And so the Buddha says, in the same way, in the past, sensual pleasures were painful to touch, hot and scorching. In the future, they will be painful, hot and scorching. And now, at present, sensual pleasures are painful, hot and scorching. But those people who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, who are devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, who burn with fever for sensual pleasures, have faculties that are impaired. And here this is a kind of loaded doctrinal expression. Or actually it's the next phrase that has that loaded doctrinal expression. For those sensual pleasures are actually painful to touch, these people acquire a mistaken perception of them as pleasant. And the expression here, mistaken perception, viparita sanya, links up with a standard doctrinal category in the early Buddhist discourses. That is, of the 4 distortions of perception, which is to perceive what is actually unlovely or non-beautiful as beautiful. In other words, to perceive the physical body, which when you look beneath the skin, it's just flesh, bones, and blood. But people look at the skin, the surface of the skin, they say, oh, what a lovely girl, what a handsome man. But it's all just on the surface. Distorted perception. Then we perceive things as being stable, lasting, even permanent. But when you look at them with true insight, one sees that they're all impermanent. And then we see in the worldly enjoyments, we perceive the possibility of real pleasure, real happiness. But when we look at them, again with deep insight, with penetrating investigation, we see they're impermanent, unstable, unreliable. And so we recognize that they are dukkha, really sources of suffering and bondage. And then we grasp hold of especially the things internal to ourselves. We take them, this is mine, this is I, this is myself. So this is the distorted perception of a self in what is truly not self. So we have the 4 distorted perceptions of the unlovely, or of loveliness and what is really unlovely, of permanence and the impermanent, of pleasure or happiness and what is really a source of suffering, and of self in what is really anatta, non-self, devoid of self. Okay, so then the Buddha continues the argument that based on this distorted perception, in the case of the leper, he has the sores and blisters on his limbs, and the more he scratches these wounds, the fouler, more evil-smelling and more infected the wounds become, yet he gets a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment in scratching the openings of his wounds. And so the Buddha says, in the case of those beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, who are devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, burning with fever for sensual pleasures, they indulge in sensual pleasures, and the more they indulge in them, the more their craving for sensual pleasures increases, and the more they are burned by their fever for sensual pleasures. Yet they find a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment based upon the 5 chords of sensual pleasures. So this passage points to, I put on the board before the Vipassana retreat, the diagram which shows what I call the cyclic nature of sensual desire. One begins with sensual craving, one gets the object of enjoyment, one indulges the craving, there comes a temporary relief from that insistent burning of the desire, that pressure or urge of the desire. That subsides and one experiences relief. Ah, how pleasant, how enjoyable. The desire is gone. But then after some time, again, it's like If one has a fire, one thinks, I'll put out the fire, and one takes a hose connected to a tank of petroleum and sprays the fire. And so when the petroleum hits the fire, initially, because it's liquid, the flames of the fire go down. I think they do. But then immediately, the fire flares up again and starts burning more intensely. Or maybe petroleum starts burning immediately. But you take some logs of wood, and one thinks, I'll extinguish the fire by throwing these logs of wood on it. One throws the logs on it, the flame goes down. You don't see the flame. But after 20 minutes or so, the flame is still burning, burning, burning. It catches on to the logs of wood, and then the fire flares up and it's burning even more fiercely, more intensely than before. And so in the same way, the craving for sense pleasures, it goes down through indulgence, but then the anusaya, the latent tendency, is still present within, and it starts gaining momentum, building up, until again it's burning more strongly than before. And then the Buddha caps his argument with this example of a powerful king who is able to freely indulge himself, enjoying anything he wants amongst the 5 chords of sensual pleasures. But the Buddha said, he asked Māgandiya, have you ever seen such a king or royal minister who is able to abide free from thirst with a mind inwardly at peace? And Māgandiya says, no, Master Gotama. And then the Buddha says, I too have never seen or heard of such a king. But on the contrary, those ascetics or Brahmins who have understood as they really are the arising, passing away, gratification, danger, and escape in the case of sensual pleasures, and to remove the craving for sensual pleasures. These are the ones who are able to dwell free from thirst with a mind inwardly at peace. Okay, this is as far as I got last time. Okay, so now we continue. Okay, now after delivering the series of very powerful arguments, the Buddha utters an exclamation. The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana, or nirvana, is the greatest bliss. The Eightfold Path is the best of paths, for it leads safely to the deathless. The first and second lines actually occur in the Dhammapada as Dhammapada verse 204, the first line and the fourth line. Okay, now when the Buddha utters this verse, then the wanderer Māgandiya says, he expresses his appreciation, and he says, it's wonderful, Master Gotama, it is marvelous, this verse you've just spoken. Then he recites the first 2 lines. And he says, we too have heard this said by the wanderers in our own tradition, in my own tradition. And the 2 statements agree. But the Buddha is not going to settle for an agreement with these wanderers. Of course, Māgandiya belongs to the school of the hedonists, those who think sensual pleasure is the greatest enjoyment. So the Buddha asks them, what do your own teachers and their teachers, what do they understand by health? What do they understand by nirvana? Then Māgandiya says, he rubs his body with his hands, and he says, this is what is meant by health. This is what is meant by nirvana, that I am now healthy and happy and nothing afflicts me. In other words, now he's moved from maybe he's willing to concede now that maybe sensual pleasures are not the highest enjoyment, but still he thinks good bodily health is identical with the highest enjoyment. And here the way he uses the expression nibbana or nirvana, this indicates that the word nirvana was not an invention of the Buddha, but it was used by many of the ascetic communities in his time as a designation for the state of perfect satisfaction, ultimate happiness, complete contentment. They all had some conception of nirvana, this ultimate happiness, but they differed in their interpretation of it. And in the famous Brahmajala Sutta, this is the first sutta in the Digha Nikaya, the Buddha gives a classification of the 62 philosophical views that were current during his life. And he speaks of one class of views are called the views on supreme nibbana, here and now. I think it's Dita Dhamma Parama Nibbana. And he mentions 5 wrong views about nirvana. And the first of these wrong views is the idea that when a person can freely enjoy himself to the utmost through the 5 senses, can enjoy sensual pleasures to the utmost through the 5 physical senses, this is the highest nirvana here and now. The other 4 wrong views identify nirvana with the attainment of the 4 jhanas, or meditative absorptions. And so Māgandiya's teachers, his school, seems to be that particular school that identified supreme nibbana with the uninhibited enjoyment of the 5 qualities of sensual pleasure, 5 types of sensual pleasure. And now the Buddha is going to counter Māgandiya's position with another one of these really striking and memorable similes. He says, Māgandiya, suppose there was a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms, who could not see blue, yellow, red, or pink forms, who could not see what is even and uneven, who can't see the stars, sun, or moon. Then another man might come along saying, it's very nice, wonderful to be wearing clean white clothes. And then the man would think, I want to wear white clothes also. Where can I get a white cloth? Where can I get a white cloth? Then a clever, scheming man thinks, this blind man can't see anything. He's very foolish, but he's rich. Maybe he's inherited a lot of money. So let me cheat him. I have this dirty, worthless, soiled garment. It's just, I've been using it as an apron when cooking fried rice and fried bean curd and curry. It's all stained and dirty. Let me get rid, instead of throwing it away, let me just push it off on this poor, deluded fellow and tell him, this is a beautiful white cloth. Beautiful, wonderful white cloth. Why don't you buy it from me and wear it? Okay, and so the man buys it from him, puts it on, and he is very happy, very joyful, and he goes around and says to everybody, oh, look, I'm wearing a beautiful, spotless, clean white cloth. Okay, so then the Buddha says, what do you think when that man who was blind from birth accepted that dirty soiled cloth, put it on, and went around boasting about his clean cloth, did he do so with knowledge and vision, because he had seen for himself, or did he do so out of faith in the man with the good eyesight? And Māgandiya says, he didn't know and see for himself, but he did so out of faith in the man with eyesight. And so the Buddha says, the wanderers of other sects are blind and without vision. They do not know health and they do not see Nibbana, yet they utter that statement. And the point at this stage in the argument is that this body that Māgandiya is taking to be the healthy, strong, vigorous body that Māgandiya is taking to be nirvana here and now, this is really like the dirty, soiled garment. And he's going around and saying, this is health, this is Nibbana. It's like the blind man saying of the dirty, soiled garment, this is the clean, white cloth. And then the Buddha, he says that this verse, the full verse with 4 lines, was previously spoken by earlier Buddhas, and then it sort of circulated down amongst the common people, and it became a saying in the world that somehow they lost the second 2 lines of the verse. They only kept the first 2 lines, and they misunderstood the meaning of nirvana to think that it's just the ultimate in sensual pleasure. And so now the Buddha says, although this body, again this is some pretty strong line, this body is a disease, a tumor, a dart, a calamity and an affliction. And if you have doubts about this, spend a few weeks, few months working in the ward of a hospital, intensive care unit, and see for yourself what suffering the body is subject to. Okay, so this body is a disease, a tumor, a dart, a calamity, and an affliction. And yet you, referring to this body, you call this good, you call this health, you call this Nibbana. You do not have that noble vision. Here the Buddha uses the expression Arya Chakku. It's actually noble eye, the eye of a noble one, by means of which you might know health and see Nibbana. Here the Buddha is leading Māgandiya further and further, because the Buddha has this knowledge through his special Buddha faculty. He knows that Māgandiya has very strong, wholesome roots which have just not yet come to the surface, not yet blossomed. And he knows that Māgandiya, in fact, has the potential to become an arahant within that life itself. So he has to sort of provoke Māgandiya and lead him step by step. And now, at this point, it seems a dramatic change has taken place within Māgandiya, since he now declares that he has, it seems that he's now abandoned his previous wrong views. And now he has confidence. He develops pasada, which means that the mind is becoming trusting or confident in the Buddha. Previously, if you remember at the beginning of the sutta, when he saw the Buddha's bed in the Brahman's house, he said, that's an inauspicious sight. This terribly destructive ascetic Gautama is staying here. But now his mind has really been changing through the force of the Buddha's argument. And now it seems he's dropped all of his resistance and is opening up to the Buddha. And so he says, I have confidence in Master Gautama that Master Gotama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I can come to know what is truly meant by health, and that I can see Nibbana. Now he recognizes that Nibbana is not the body, not the enjoyment of sense pleasures, but something that requires this Aryan, noble faculty of vision. And he's already subtly appealing to the Buddha for a direct teaching that will open his eyes to the truth of Nibbana. But the Buddha is not yet ready to teach him. He picks up that simile of the blind man and he develops it in a different direction. Suppose there was the man blind from birth. Then his friends, companions, relatives, and so on bring a physician to treat him. The physician makes many types of medicine for him. The man takes the medicine, and yet, though the medicine is applied, the man does not regain his vision. Wouldn't the doctor then, trying all of these different types of treatment, just reap weariness and disappointment, frustration? Māgandiya says, yes, sir. Then the Buddha says, so too, Māgandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma, this is that health, this is that Nibbana, maybe you won't see, maybe you won't know what is really health. Maybe you won't see Nibbana, and that would be wearisome and troublesome for me. So through the simile, the Buddha is refusing that request of Māgandiya for a direct teaching. But now, doesn't this seem like the Buddha is supposed to be very compassionate, eager to teach people, to help them? Why is he refusing? Why? Excuse me? In what way? Not quite beg, but to sort of like holding off, it's sort of like giving his faculties a chance to mature and become stronger. Of course, if he gets discouraged and says, okay, you're not going to teach me, that's the way it is, then it shows that he's not really earnest. But when the Buddha, sometimes he even refuses 3 times. Like the most famous incident is this one with this wanderer called Bhikkhu, who thought he was an arhat, till some deva, some deity, told him, you're just deluded, you're not an arhat. Then Bhikkhu asked the deity, is there anyone true arhat living in the world? Then the deity said, in the town of Savatthi, there is one called the Buddha. He is the arhat, the liberated one in the world. If you want guidance, go to him. So then Bhikkhu went as quickly as he could. All the ways he was living near Bombay, where Bombay is today, the west coast of India. He traveled without spending more than one night at any one place along the way. He went all the ways to Savatthi, which is far in the north of India. And then he went to the monastery. Where's the Buddha? The Buddha has gone to town. He's on the alms round now. Bhikkhu goes into the town, looks down all the streets. Finally, he sees the Buddha walking quietly down one street and comes to him and says, sir, teach me the Dhamma. The Buddha says, this isn't the time for teaching. I'm collecting my food now. A second time he says, please teach me. The Buddha says, this isn't the time to teach. I'm collecting my food. A third time, please teach. Third time the Buddha says, nothing doing, I'm on my alms round now. Then the Buddha says, wait until after I collect my food, then I'll teach you. But Bhikkhu says, who knows how long I have to live? I might die anytime, you might die anytime. Then the Buddha taught him just 3 sentences. And then right on the spot, he went through all the stages of liberation, of enlightenment, one by one till he became an arhat, just with the snap of a fingers. But if the Buddha said, let me teach you right away, then his faculties wouldn't have become so sharp to really understand the teaching. Okay, so now after the Buddha refuses or puts off Māgandiya, Māgandiya repeats his statement of confidence and says, I have confidence in Master Gautama thus. You are capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I can come to know true health and to see Nibbana. Okay, now the Buddha again picks up the simile of the man born blind. He says, suppose there was a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms. And again, this continues, the simile now it continues again with the theme of the soiled cloth. The man cheats him with the dirty soiled garment thus. Here is a white cloth for you, beautiful, spotless, and clean. He accepts it, puts it on, and goes around boasting. Look at my beautiful cloth. Isn't this the most wonderful suit of clothes you ever saw? So white, spotless, flawless, immaculate. Then his friends and companions think, how are we going to convince him that he's wrong? The only way is to help him regain his eyesight. So they bring a physician to treat him. The physician makes various medicines, and then, lo and behold, they apply the medicine to the eyes, and the miracle takes place. The vision comes up, and the man can see. Then, as soon as he regains his vision, of course there's a lot presupposed here that the man will have all of the categories that we use, that he will know what is white, what is dirty. But he looks down at his cloth, and he looks and he says, how could I be wearing such a dirty, greasy, soiled garment? And I'm making an utter fool of myself, boasting that I have this beautiful, spotless white cloth. And as soon as he sees it, his desire and liking for that dirty, soiled garment would be abandoned. And then he would burn with indignation and enmity towards that man who cheated him. And he might even think, if I ever see that man, ever find out who he is, I might even kill him. He thinks, for a long time I have been tricked, cheated, and defrauded by this man with this dirty, soiled garment, who is telling me, this is your white cloth, beautiful, spotless, and clean. Okay, now the next paragraph is going to be very, very deep passage. So too, Māgandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma thus, this is that health, this is that Nibbana, you might know health and see Nibbana. Now, what is meant here by regaining the sight, or gaining that sight, so that one could see what is health and see Nibbana? This means it's the arising of what is called, in the terminology of the suttas, the arising of the Dhamma Chakku, the eye of the Dhamma. And this is the realization, the awakening experience, or the breakthrough experience that transforms a person from being an ordinary person or a worldling, a putujana, transforms a person from an ordinary person into an Aryan person, a noble one. At the lowest level, transforms a person into a stream enterer, Sotapanna. And normally this eye of Dhamma arises at the highest point in the development of insight or Vipassana. It's actually when one reaches the highest point of Vipassana and then takes a jump beyond that point, then one enters into the opening of the eye of Dhamma. One makes the breakthrough into the Dhamma. And what happens with the opening of the eye of Dhamma is that up to that point, the mind has been contemplating the arising and passing of conditioned formations, the breaking up and passing away of the phenomena of the five aggregates. But at this point, the awareness or attention shifts away from all conditioned phenomena and penetrates the unconditioned element, the deathless element. And simultaneously with that awakening to the deathless element, the penetration of the unconditioned element, the mind, the wisdom mind, also understands or fully comprehends the nature of the five aggregates. And what happens at that moment, again, with the penetration of the unconditioned, the deluded conceptions that center around the five aggregates get momentarily exploded and broken to pieces, so they vanish. And so that one penetrates the unconditioned element and also simultaneously, or we could say retroflexively, sees that the five aggregates are not what one has taken them to be. Normally we take the five aggregates, that's bodily form, feeling, perception, the volitional formations, consciousness. The five aggregates, they're normally conceived through these distorting concepts or categories of being mine, I, myself. And these concepts get superimposed upon the five aggregates and almost merged with them, so that these mental and bodily factors, we are constantly conceiving them, interpreting them, viewing them as being mine, I, and myself. But these concepts are really just concepts which don't have counterparts in actuality, in reality. They're superimpositions, superstructure, conceptual overlays, mental imputations, which are parasitic upon the five aggregates. These notions dwell within the five aggregates like a parasite in the body, but they really have no place in the five aggregates, but they are just products of ignorance. And because we interpret or view the five aggregates in terms of these concepts, we hold to the five aggregates with desire and lust, with clinging and craving. But when the eye of Dhamma opens and penetrates the unconditioned, at that very moment, that very occasion, the concepts, ideas, I, mine, and self temporarily disintegrate. Actually, the concept myself permanently disintegrates. The concepts I and mine temporarily disintegrate, but they come back. So that the stream enterer can never again identify the five aggregates with being myself. But the stream enterer will still think in terms of mine and I. It's only at the fourth stage, the stage of arhatship, that the notions mine and I are utterly uprooted, utterly eradicated. Okay, so when the eye of Dhamma opens, then this desire and lust for the five aggregates, it's temporarily abandoned with that experience. So it will return up until, and it will continue to function up until arhatship. But when the eye of Dhamma opens, then one looks at the five aggregates and one thinks, for a long time indeed, I have been tricked, cheated, and defrauded by this mind. For when clinging, I have been clinging just to material form. I remember the Pali, it's rupang yeva upadiyamano upadiyami. That eva there, it's only form that one has been clinging to, only feeling, only the mental formations, only consciousness. In other words, it's not form which is truly mine and I. Not form, not feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, which is a true I, a true self, truly mine. But one sees the five aggregates as being just these selfless, empty phenomena, conditioned phenomena, arising and passing through conditions. And then one recognizes that it is through this clinging to the five aggregates that I have been driving myself on. But one recognizes that it is this mind, one's own mind, that has been tricking and deceiving one all this time by telling us it's mine, it's I, myself. Mine, I, myself. Just like the white cloth, the trickster is telling the blind man, it's a white cloth, beautiful white cloth, beautiful white cloth. So the mind is telling us, it's mine, it's I, it's yourself, yourself, the self. And so we cling to the five aggregates, thinking, this is mine, this is I, this is myself. Just as though it was like a clean white cloth. But when the eye opens, we see no I, no mine, no self, just empty phenomena, like the dirty soiled cloth. And then one realizes that it is through this clinging as a condition that one has been frantically engaged in all of this activity which has been building up the round of existence, life after life after life. And that it is this clinging which has been plunging one again and again into birth, and from birth to old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Okay, and now here you might recognize we have the end part of the formula of dependent origination, the famous 12-factored formula. So the Buddha has sort of merged this teaching on the nature of the five aggregates with his teaching on dependent origination. And now at this point, like Māgandiya will be completely convinced about the Buddha. He now has complete confidence in the Buddha. And so he says, I have confidence in Master Gotama thus. Master Gotama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I might rise up from this seat cured of my blindness. This, I think, the important thing that just occurred to me. Okay, now the first part of this discourse that I covered in the review, that we covered last time and that I reviewed, which deals with the Buddha's examination of sensual pleasures, that part of the discourse is directed against craving for sensual enjoyment. If you remember the formula in the Four Noble Truths, the nature of what is the origin of suffering, there are the three types of craving. Craving for sensual pleasures, craving for continued existence, then craving for annihilation. In the case of this Māgandiya, there's no problem with the craving for annihilation. He is one who had been attached to sensual enjoyments and to life, one who freely enjoyed life. So the first part of the Buddha's discourse, the examination of sensual pleasures, that is intended to knock out Māgandiya's craving for sensual pleasures. And now this second part of the discourse, where the Buddha introduces the verse about Nibbana as the greatest bliss, continuing through this disclosure on the nature of the five aggregates, that is intended to knock out bhava tanha, the craving for existence. Okay, and so now Māgandiya has become so confident in the Buddha that he says, I believe that you are capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I might get up from this seat cured of my blindness. In other words, he thinks he could even become a stream enterer while still sitting in that same seat. And so the Buddha then says, he gives him more practical advice now, not a new disclosure on the teaching, but he says, you should associate with true men, or here maybe now we should translate true persons, sappurisa. This is the noble individuals, wise, virtuous, enlightened individuals. And when you associate with superior, wise, virtuous individuals, then you will hear the true doctrine, the true Dhamma. When you hear the true Dhamma, you will practice in accordance with the true Dhamma. And when you practice in accordance with the true Dhamma, then you will know and see for yourself thus. Before I read the next passage, we have here an important sequence. Particularly in ancient times, there weren't books to read. So to hear the Dhamma, one would have to seek out wise and virtuous, knowledgeable friends, associate with them. We've had this sequence already in some of the suttas that we studied earlier on the approach to the Dhamma. One associates with them, then one hears the teaching. After one hears and learns the teaching well, then one puts it into practice. And by practicing, then one comes to realization. and in this case you will know and see for yourself, these are diseases, tumors, and darts. That is now the Buddha is referring to the 5 aggregates. But here these diseases, tumors, and darts cease without remainder. And with the cessation of my clinging, there comes the cessation of being or becoming. With the cessation of becoming, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. And so with this paragraph, the Buddha, having led Māgandiya to the point where one gains the vision of Dhamma, he explains how one develops that vision further to the point that all clinging is uprooted, and with the eradication of clinging, the entire process of birth and death comes to an end. And at this point, Māgandiya declares his confidence or declares his appreciation of the Buddha's discourse. All of this is using stock formulas now. Then he announces that he goes for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and lo and behold, he asks to receive ordination as a monk, ready to give up his sense pleasures completely. The Buddha, again this is stock, says, those who were members of other sects and want to become monks in this religion, this Dhamma and discipline, generally they have to live on probation for 4 months. The other monks will examine them, and if the monks find them to be suitable, then they will get ordination. But the Buddha says, I recognize individual differences in this matter. In other words, if the Buddha thinks a person is suitable, the Buddha can recommend him for ordination at once. But Māgandiya now, again using stock words, says that if candidates normally have to wait on probation for 4 months and then get ordination, I'll settle for 4 years. Then at the end of 4 years, if the monks want, the other monks, they can give me ordination. But the Buddha knew Māgandiya had the potential for arhatship, so the Buddha gave him the ordination, first the novice ordination, then the full ordination. And then not long after his ordination, Māgandiya, dwelling alone, diligent, ardent, and resolute, realized for himself that supreme goal of the holy life, and he directly knew birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming to any state of existence in the future. And now he's the Venerable Māgandiya, became one of the Arhats. That is the end of this discourse. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
In paragraph
Yeah.
22, he says, well, I can try to teach you and maybe you won't get it.
Yeah.
Again, I can understand that. In 24, he says, I might teach you and you might relinquish your craving.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how that's I don't understand how that's meant as a dissuasion. Sounds like, okay, that's... in 22, he's saying, well, I can teach you, you might not get it, so I'm not going to teach you.
Yeah.
And then he asks him again. In 24, it's sort of presented like it's supposed to be another dissuasion.
No, in this case, I think the Buddha is really actually showing him the Dhamma directly.
That's what it reads like. But at the end, in 25, he's like, no, go ahead, really teach me.
You mean the point is that with the teaching of 24 that Māgandiya didn't actually see the Dhamma?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm confused by it. When I first read it, it seemed to me that 24 was supposed to be another dissuasion. And I didn't see how possible it could be.
No, I wouldn't.
He didn't ask it again.
I wouldn't understand it in that way. I think at this point, in paragraph 24, the Buddha is sort of showing him what he would see if the eye of Dhamma were to arise in him. And by doing that, the Buddha is actually giving him the kind of teaching that he needs for the eye of Dhamma to arise. It's possible, though the text doesn't indicate this, but my suspicion or expectation, that at the end of paragraph 24, probably Māgandiya became a Sotapanna. And then when he speaks in paragraph 25 of rising up cured of his blindness, perhaps at that point he even thinks that he could become an arhat on the spot. Maybe, but this is conjecture. Usually there's a stock phrase which indicates the attainment of of stream entry, sotapatti. While he was sitting there arose in him the stainless, spotless vision of the Dhamma. Whatever is of the nature of arising is of the nature of ceasing. But we don't have that in the sutta. But it's quite possible that it took place. Yeah.
Paragraph 23.
Yeah.
Paragraph 23. The Buddha is showing him how to understand suffering.
Yeah.
What is suffering?
Yeah.
That's a noble truth.
Yeah.
The first noble truth.
Yeah.
And then paragraph 24 goes on to the second noble truth, the origin of suffering.
Yeah, actually that's...
And then paragraph 25 is the cessation of the whole mass of suffering.
Yeah.
In the end, to show the way is to renounce. So,
yeah.
And then that's the fourth noble truth of suffering. So in fact, this whole sutra follows that trend.
Actually, that's very good. Very, very good. Yeah.
First, second, third, fourth noble truth.
Yeah, actually, very, very good. Yeah, actually, yeah, quite good. Yeah, so much of what has come before is really pointing out the nature of suffering and inherent in, say, sensual enjoyment and attachment to the body. Then paragraph 24 is bringing in the origin aspect of dependent origination. So that's showing the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. But I would say paragraph 25, here you have associate with true men, then you will hear the Dhamma. When you hear the true Dhamma, then you will practice in accordance with true Dhamma. And then when you practice, then you will know and see for yourself. That could be taken as the path. Not in terms of Noble Eightfold. Well, it's the Noble Eightfold path, but not in terms of the usual 8 path factors, but the way of, say, of engaging with the path. First through right association, then through learning, then through practice, then through realization. And then through the realization, then there comes, that is like the fourth noble truth. Then through the realization aspect of the fourth truth, then there comes the truth of cessation, the third truth. That's a very good way to explain it. Any further questions? Yeah. It's usually called dependent origination or conditioned co-arising. I don't want to explain that now because it's a big topic and there will be suttas coming in the future that are on the list that deal entirely with that topic. So then when we come to those suttas, I see later when we come to the cultivation of wisdom on the Sammaditthi Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 9, Majjhima Nikaya number 11, partly, Majjhima Nikaya number 38. Those, then we will discuss dependent origination. The difference. Okay, I think the difference between mine and I should be pretty clear. The book, I say this is mine. I wouldn't say this is I. In the case of the 5 aggregates, sometimes one identifies with one or another we think sometimes, some people think of the body as being themselves. I am the body. But most of the time we speak about my body, so we take the body to be mine. It gets a little ambivalent with, say, feelings. We speak about my feelings, but sometimes we get so carried away by feeling that we identify with feeling. Maybe the deepest level of identification is with consciousness or mind. We take that as being the real I. Everything else as being mine. So there's like a shifting base of identification. Sometimes we take things like feeling, perception, volitions to be mine. Other times we identify with them so thoroughly that we take them to be I. I think the subtle distinction is between the I and myself. This is a pretty tricky point. I'm not even sure that I have it completely right. But it seems to me that the idea of myself is the idea of a lasting I, an I which endures through time, whereas the idea of I can arise just spontaneously. And it could be, I could be the center of what is called defiled emotions, like if somebody does better than me, say, earns more money than myself, then I become envious of him. There's a sense of I here. Well, ego is a little ambiguous because it could apply to both myself and the I. But okay, ego in the sense of the emotional base is being hurt. Somebody is maybe more learned than I am, or more respected, so then I get some feelings of envy or jealousy. So there's a sense of I is working there. But myself is more like a concept that we work with when we're thinking philosophically, even if we're not philosophers, but what is my true identity? What am I really? Then we speculate, conjecture. Well, maybe some will think, since we're just created from matter, there's no lasting spiritual principle, so I am the body, so then the body becomes the self. And that way the notion I gets some kind of content through philosophical speculation. When we think I am the body and then we hold to this as a view, then we're working with the notion of self. Or some other thinker might think, no, the body perishes, turns to dust, but there is the soul that goes on from life to life. That is, the mind or consciousness goes on. So that consciousness, that is the self. Yeah. So it said that the commentaries say that the idea of mind, this idea springs from craving, tanha. Tanha mana ditti. Yeah, so tanha, which is craving, that gives rise to the notion mind. Since through craving we're continually trying to increase the boundaries of what is mine, what is mine, what is mine. And then we hold to things through craving. This is mine, not yours. What's yours is mine and what's mine is mine. That's sort of the program of craving. Then mana means conceit. That gives rise to the notion I, or you say it centers around the notion I. I'm the best, I'm the brightest, I'm the foremost, chief. And then it's ditti, that's views. The philosopher sitting in his study thinking, what is my true self? Or the yogi meditating in the forest based on wrong views, looking for, I must find my true self, I must find my true self. Then they come up, this is myself, that is myself. Okay, Suki. Yeah. 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 I would say both the notions of both the notions of I and of self are negated by the doctrine of non-self. But in the process of elimination, the notion myself is eliminated in the scheme of the 4 stages of enlightenment. This idea myself is eliminated by the first stage, the stage of stream enter, Sotapanna. So the stream winner has seen the truth of anatta, of non-self, and so this person can never again adopt any view of self, any theory of self. But even a stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, still have the idea, I. Their mind still has that idea in a very subtle way, not like an ordinary person. But the notion of I still appears to them, though they realize it's a deluded idea, so they don't grasp onto it. But it's only at the 4th stage, this final stage of arhatship, that even the notion I am is uprooted. And so for the arhat, he doesn't even have the notion I am doesn't occur. Excuse me? Yeah. There's still the 5 aggregates are there functioning in unison. Yeah. Not the 4th jhana. No, the 4th stage of enlightenment. The 4 jhanas, those are just stages of meditative absorption. Yeah. So an arhat will say, go about normal activities. Say he has to get dressed in the morning, brush his teeth, take a shower. So all of these things go on. He has thoughts about them, but the idea of that there's an I doing any of this doesn't occur. The idea of I am is completely removed, permanently, ultimately removed. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that makes sense. In a way, yeah, that would be like experimenting. That would be approximating to the experience of the removal of I am. But it's still not yet a radical removal of it. But it's developing that frame of mind which can see things or de-identify with one's experience. Yeah. Okay. There was somebody in the back there. A question.
As far as my research about the Buddha, himself associated with we're not wise. Otherwise, why would he be keeping us to know?
Yeah.
And know what's going on and can help you.
Yeah.
What you said about Jesus that he ought to be righteous, but unrighteous when they asked about him hanging out with you. As far as I know, the Buddha.
Yeah. But the Buddha now, he's giving this advice to a disciple who has not yet reached realization. And he's giving him the advice that should be followed, in order to understand the Dhamma and to get cured of one's blindness. So to bring that about, one has to begin by associating with good people, with the wise and virtuous people. Okay, then Ken. Actually, especially to Sakaya Ditti. Yeah. Is a Pugala. No, the I is a way of conceiving. Okay, these are technical terms. A way of conceiving Pugala. The Pugala means the person, which is this is a rather technical issue. It's a too technical issue to answer. Okay. Oh, one more, okay. As direct knowing. I wouldn't identify with the third eye. The third eye can be what they call the divine eye. It's not a higher faculty of knowledge, but it just sees things beyond the range of ordinary vision. The way the terms panya and abhinya are used in the text, they come very close, but there are aspects of panya, of wisdom, which are not necessarily abhinya, direct knowledge. One gathers wisdom first through hearing, reflecting. Yeah. Realization is the result of a process which builds up gradually through, as one gains deeper insight into the nature of things, you could say that is the building up of wisdom, the increase or generation of wisdom until, excuse me? Well, anyway, I'm just saying the way the word panya or wisdom would be used in the Buddhist text. It's only when the wisdom reaches a certain level of maturity that it turns into what we would call direct knowledge. Yeah. Okay, then we will stop. I was going to go on to samsara, but I think samsara will have to wait till next week. And then that will just be, there's not so much to explain in that, I think. So then if I get through samsara next week, and come to the end, if I come to the end of samsara next week, I was going to do an overview of that chapter. So, of course, I'm not going to assign people to buy the Samyutta Nikaya. That's too much. But if you have the Samyutta Nikaya, then read chapter 15. Otherwise, I'm just going to do a sort of summary of the contents. And then we go on in the Majjhima Nikaya to Sutta number 82. This is the story of Ratapala. Okay, so we do the sharing of the merits. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. 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 Siddhya.